I recognize the member for Guelph.
Thank you, Speaker. Honored to rise today to speak to Bill 165, the Keeping Costs Down for Enbridge Act, I think that's what it should be called, and making the people of Ontario pay the bill for Enbridge's Operations Act. It's outrageous, frankly, Speaker, for the government to intervene, to take the unprecedented step for the first time in Ontario's history to intervene in the independent decision of the Ontario Energy Board, the regulator designed to protect the people of Ontario. It's outrageous for the government to intervene in that way in order to continue to subsidize Enbridge, a giant multinational corporation, to expand fossil gas infrastructure in this province, especially at a time when we're facing a climate emergency. I mean, Canada's on fire yet again. The toxic smoke from Western Canada is blowing into Ontario as we speak, leading to more toxic air that we breathe. The International Energy Association, an incredibly conservative organization, has made it absolutely clear that if we're going to meet our climate obligations, we can't continue to expand fossil fuel infrastructure. And we finally have the OEB, a very conservative organization, finally make a decision that actually takes into account the climate crisis and, quite frankly, what's good for energy consumers in this province. And in less than 24 hours, the government acts to overturn it. And we now know from the FOI request around the emails around this decision that even the government's own lawyers were worried about the government taking this action. But the government said, no. We're not going to listen to the legal, we're not going to listen to the lawyers, we're not going to listen to the independent regulator. We're going to listen to Enbridge and their $19 million CEO and actually put Ontarians on the hook for the stranded assets associated with rolling out fossil gas infrastructure. And you know what makes it completely even more galling? If there wasn't an alternative for people, if there was no other alternative for people, then you might say the government has an argument here. But people can have heat pumps, which the OEB decision, backed up by mounds of evidence, shows will actually be 13% cheaper for people to install a heat pump rather than fossil gas infrastructure. So we have to ask, who's the government acting for? People of Ontario or Enbridge Gas? And it's clearly Enbridge Gas. A analysis independently done by Brandon Schaffel from the Ivy School describes it as this, and I quote, effectively, this government's decision, the OEB decision, effectively shifts the upfront gas connection cost onto developers in a manner similar to development charges for water and sewer connections, other forms of infrastructure. But unlike sewer and water, developers could decide to skip the gas connection altogether and install heat pumps, which would actually save people money. So the government's decision explicitly undermines the OEB and threatens the credibility of the independent regulator and energy investment in this province. It's a bad outcome for customers, but it's a good outcome for Enbridge. So, Speaker, why is the government doing this when we're in the midst of a climate crisis? And we know that investors around the world are pouring not billions, trillions of dollars into the green energy transition. As a matter of fact, last year alone, $1.88 trillion went into the green energy transition. Half of it into wind and solar because they're now the lowest cost sources of electricity generation, but a big and growing chunk of it into heat pumps. You know why, Speaker? Because heat pumps save people money and reduce climate pollution at the same time. That's exactly why over the last 2 years in the U.S., more new home developments have installed heat pumps over fossil gas because it's cheaper for people. Better for the climate, cheaper for people. In Europe right now, 40% year-over-year increase in heat pump sales. You know why heat pumps are growing so fast in Europe? Cheaper for people. Good for people, good for the economy, good for creating jobs, manufacturing heat pumps. Not so good for giant corporations like Enbridge. So which side of the ledger is the government on? I want to know. And what is especially infuriating about this is not only are they ramping up fossil gas infrastructure, which is going to increase climate pollution, they're doing it at a time when Ontario has the worst performance in climate pollution now. The data just released 10 days or so ago shows that the province with the largest increase in climate pollution in the entire country in 2021-22, province of Ontario. Matter of fact, 60% of the increase in climate pollution in Canada during that period comes from the province of Ontario. And now this government not only wants to expand fossil gas infrastructure for buildings, they want to ramp up gas plants, which is going to increase climate pollution from the electricity sector by 580%. So I've heard the members opposite say what a clean grid we have. Yes, it was 96% clean when they took office. Now it's 87% clean and going down because they're going to increase climate pollution by 580% the rest of this decade. At a time when we're all paying the price. We're all paying the price for the climate crisis. You know, last year in Ontario, 1 million acres burned. We had toxic air pollution all down the eastern seaboard. As a matter of fact, in just 4 days, from June 4th to 8th in the city of Toronto, or the province of Ontario, the healthcare system paid an additional $1.28 billion due to hospital admissions from toxic air exposure. We know from the Financial Accountability Officer that the cost to infrastructure in the province of Ontario alone, just public infrastructure, just this decade, the next 6 years, is going to be $26.2 billion. We know that according to the Insurance Bureau of Canada, the damage to insured assets last year due to the climate crisis, $3.1 billion. They estimate that the cost of uninsured assets is 3 times that, almost $10 billion, costing everybody in this country an additional $750. The cost of the climate crisis is only going up. We're all paying for it. And we have solutions. We have solutions that will save us money, like heat pumps. We have solutions that will create jobs by installing things like heat pumps. And we have the opportunity to actually move in that direction, and we have an incredibly conservative energy regulator actually saying, you know what, we should maybe start thinking about this. That if we're going to do a 40-year amortization period starting in 2025, that takes us to 2065, 15 years after the country's commitment to be net zero. So why would we make a decision like that, leaving the stranded assets on the backs of energy consumers in this province? It will be the people of Ontario who will pay for it. That's exactly what the OEB decision said. You know what? When we have a truly competitive market, people would make a financial decision and say, we're not going to take on that risk. But Enbridge doesn't have to make that decision because they're a regulated monopoly. And the regulator said, you know what, Enbridge, we're going to make you decide to take that risk by removing the 40-year amortization period because the people of Ontario should not bear the risk of your business decisions, especially when there are cheaper, cleaner, better alternatives.
The Minister of Energy.
I'd like to thank my member, the Leader of the Green Party, for his always thoughtful commentary that he brings to the House. He does a great job, and it was very enjoyable listening to his 10 minutes of comments. Cherry-picked a lot of interesting statistics that he threw out, and it's a lot to unpack in a one-minute question, Mr. Speaker. But he did touch on the fact that we do have very, very affordable and reliable natural gas home heating in our province. And it is rate regulated. I think that's really important. The member talked about in Europe how people are moving en masse to heat pumps. Well, there's a reason for that. It's because the cost of natural gas across Europe has soared over the last number of years, far beyond the price of natural gas in our regulated province. So the question that I have for the member opposite is, does he believe that the system operator, the ISO, is prepared to power all of those natural gas heaters, that would be coming off with heat pumps?
Senator Member Guelph, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker. I really appreciate the Energy Minister's question, and I appreciate his spirited defense for the independent regulator, the Ontario Energy Board, which is sort of perplexing for me because this independent regulator that's kept gas prices relatively affordable compared to Europe made a decision to protect gas consumers in the province of Ontario. And less than 24 hours later, the Energy Minister made the unprecedented decision and announced that we're going to overturn the independent regulator's decision that protects gas consumers. So I'm just confused now because the minister is saying on the one hand, the regulator's done a pretty good job over the years. We should be happy with that. On the other hand, it's actually overturning the decision of the regulator to protect the people of Ontario. I'm going to stand with the regulator that's protecting the people of Ontario.
Thank you for that response. Questions? Ancaster Dundas, please. To the question, please.
So I find it always unusual when this government is about the free market decides to put their thumb on the scale, tipped in favor of a huge monopoly like Enbridge. And the Ontario Energy Board found that it was cheaper to build homes designed in the first place for heat pumps than to retrofit them afterwards for natural gas. And even the minister at committee talked about, I think it was about, 900 meters of pipe for a new home in Peterborough and how expensive that is. So this idea of only relying on natural gas, this idea of doubling down in stranded assets that consumers were paying for makes absolutely no sense. I think it's $14 billion in capital expenditures that will be stranded assets paid for by consumers. So my question is, if developers want to put natural gas in new hookups, that's on them. Why should consumers be forced to have natural gas and not given a choice between heat pumps and natural gas? Let the market decide.
To the question, please.
I appreciate the member's question. I mean, in a sense, I said this at committee that what the government's doing is kind of like socialism for Enbridge and capitalism for the rest of us, because a lot of this comes down to capital market risk. Who's going to assume the risk of the death spiral of stranded assets as people transition away from fossil gas? Is it going to be Enbridge, or is it going to be the people of Ontario? So the OEB said it should be Enbridge, not the people of Ontario. The government is saying it should be the people of Ontario, not Enbridge. Speaker, I'm going to stand up for the people of Ontario, help them save money, reduce their costs, and fight climate change at the same time.
We